They called it a moral recalibration. The Galactic King broadcast human extinction like theater, his molten gold throne gleaming as diplomats nodded. "Their twins are ash beneath my command," he proclaimed to cheering aliens. But then she arrived, a woman with a teacup, a scarred dog, and a honey badger. "They call me many things," she said softly. "But on Earth, mothers whisper me as Baba Yaga." The throne room glowed with amber light from the molten gold throne. It flowed like captured sunlight, casting long shadows across the faces of galactic emissaries. The air hummed with anticipation, smelling of ozone and expensive perfumes from 6 different star systems. Each diplomat wore their planet's formal robes, adjusted slightly to acknowledge the king's preference for visual conformity. He sat motionless as the broadcast signal went live across the empire. His voice carried no emotion, only the flat certainty of absolute power. The extermination, he explained, was necessary theater, a cleansing of what he called the human contagion. He described Earth's children as genetic impurities, their laughter a noise to be silenced. The spectacle was designed not just to kill, but to demonstrate the totality of his control. He spoke of twins specifically, 2 children executed simultaneously on different continents. He detailed the method with cold precision. The timing, the instruments, the way their small bodies collapsed at the exact same galactic standard second. He framed it as symmetry, aesthetic purity. The crowd of emissaries nodded along, their faces masks of diplomatic approval. One ambassador from the Cygnus system actually smiled, tapping his fingers lightly on his datapad. This was how empires justified extinction. Not with rage, but with bureaucratic language. The king called it population recalibration. The diplomats called it necessary policy. Nobody used the word murder. Nobody said children. They spoke of units, of percentages, of resource allocation. The humans were a problem to be solved, not a people to be understood. His language stripped them of personhood. Humans were vectors. Their cities were infection zones. Their culture was emotional pollution. He presented hollows of Earth's last monuments crumbling, calling it sanitization. The emissaries watched footage of burning neighborhoods without blinking. One adjusted his robe's collar, looking mildly bored. History shows this pattern repeats. Rulers never call it killing when they eliminate the unwanted. They use words that distance, that sanitize, that make horror sound like administration. The king wasn't just destroying a species. He was teaching his court how to watch destruction without flinching. How to see genocide as civic duty. The broadcast lasted 17 minutes. In that time, he redefined cruelty as entertainment. The death of children became a cultural exhibit. The extinguishing of a civilization transformed into performance art for the privileged. He finished by raising a glass of sparkling nebula wine, toasting to a cleaner galaxy. The diplomats applauded. Not loudly, but with the soft, confident clapping of people who believe they are on the right side of history. That moment created an unpayable debt. Not in credits or territory, but in moral consequence. The king had made it personal. He had turned murder into ceremony, and ceremonies demand witnesses. They demand someone to remember what really happened when the screens went dark. He thought he was demonstrating power. In truth, he was drawing a target on his entire empire. Every nod from the diplomats, every silent approval, every complicit smile, they all became entries in a ledger. The king didn't know it yet, but he wasn't just killing children. He was inviting their mother to court, and she never received an invitation she didn't answer. Then she arrived. The obsidian doors parted without sound. No armored escort. No visible weapons. Just a woman in simple dark clothing, a chipped ceramic teacup in one hand. At her heels moved 2 earth creatures, a scarred brindle dog with one torn ear and a honey badger whose low-slung body moved with deliberate, unhurried purpose. Their entrance lacked ceremony. They simply entered the space as if they owned the floor beneath their feet. The throne room's atmosphere shifted instantly. The murmur of diplomats died mid-sentence. The air conditioning hummed too loud. She walked without haste down the central aisle, her steps silent on the polished stone. The dog kept pace at her left, muscles rolling under its scarred coat. The honey badger scanned the room with flat black eyes, its gait a rolling prowl that suggested it could explode into violence without warning. They moved as a unit, a trinity of quiet intent. She stopped 20 paces from the throne. The cup in her hand steamed faintly. Chamomile, maybe. Something floral and earthly. The scent seemed absurd in that room of alien perfumes and ozone. She didn't look at the king, not yet. Her gaze swept the assembled emissaries, taking measure of each face that had applauded her children's execution. Her eyes were the color of weathered stone. They held no anger, only assessment. The dog sat at her signal. It didn't pant or fidget. Its stillness felt more threatening than barking. The honey badger remained standing, its attention fixed on the king's guards. One guard shifted his grip on his energy staff. The badger's head turned slightly. The guard froze. The message was clear. Movement would be answered. She spoke first to the diplomats. They call me many things across the stars. Her voice carried without raising. It had the texture of worn leather. Interloper, terrorist, revolutionary. She turned finally to the king. But on Earth, mothers whisper me as Baba Yaga. The name landed in the silence. It meant nothing to the aliens, but the way she said it suggested weight. History, a story they hadn't bothered to learn. Her introduction reframed everything. This wasn't diplomacy. This wasn't negotiation. This was personal reckoning wearing human skin. Strategic analysis shows the most dangerous opponents aren't those fighting for ideology or payment. They're those fighting for something stolen. A parent seeking justice operates on different tactical calculus. Their risk assessment changes. Their endurance multiplies. Their willingness to burn everything, including themselves, approaches absolute. The teacup became her anchor point. While the throne shimmered with molten gold and the walls displayed cosmic wonders, she held simple ceramics, earth clay, hand-thrown. A chip on the rim showed white under the glaze. It was a quiet fuck you to all their opulence, a reminder that some things hold value beyond splendor. Her calm unsettled them more than shouting would have. Rage they understood. Rage followed predictable patterns. This quiet certainty suggested depths they couldn't measure. She wasn't here to make demands. She was here to deliver verdicts. The personal grief of one woman had just become interstellar policy. Myth stepped out of stories and into the throne room, and it carried a teacup and two lethal animals. The equation had changed, and the aliens were just beginning to realize they weren't the ones holding the variables. She didn't come for negotiation. She stood before the throne and stated the facts without ornament. I am here to collect a debt. The words landed in the quiet room like stones dropped in still water. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture. She simply stood there, the teacup warm in her hand, the dog and honey badger flanking her like extensions of her will. The debt wasn't his alone. Her gaze swept across the assembled diplomats, the advisors, the guards, each person who had watched the broadcast, each one who had nodded, each one who had stayed silent. You built a theater, she said, her voice low and even. You sold tickets to my children's execution. You clapped when the curtain fell. The king shifted on his molten throne, a slight movement almost imperceptible, the first crack in his certainty. She transformed their spectacle into a ledger. Every cheer, every approving glance, every silent complicity became an entry. A debt entry, not in credits or resources, but in consequence. They killed my twins, she said, and the words were both an accusation and a declaration. They held the weight of a collapsing star. The king's face tightened. His hands gripped the armrests of his throne. The gold seemed less brilliant suddenly, the light more desperate. His bravado began to fracture under her calm. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't threatening. She was stating accounting, the math of moral consequence. He had expected rage. He had prepared for outrage. He had no defense against this quiet, relentless tallying. A bead of sweat traced a path down the temple of the ambassador from Cygnus. The man who had smiled during the broadcast now studied the floor. She made it clear. Accountability doesn't stop with the hand that pulls the trigger. It flows to the crowd that cheers. To the system that permits. To the silence that allows. Genocide isn't a single act. It's a chorus. It requires the killer, the planner, the applauder, and the one who looks away. She named them all in that quiet, precise voice. She didn't point fingers. She simply read the ledger aloud. History shows this pattern. Systems of violence are ecosystems. They need active participants and passive enablers. The shooter and the spectator are part of the same machine. She understood this in her bones. Her grief had calcified into a cold, crystalline understanding of how cruelty works, and how to dismantle it. She wasn't here for the king. She was here for the entire architecture of approval that supported his throne. Her resolve made the shift tangible. The spectacle was over. The consequences had arrived. The power in the room ceased flowing from the throne. It began pooling around the woman in the center. The air grew heavy. The diplomats felt it. The guards felt it. The king most of all. His authority, which moments before had seemed absolute, now felt like a costume, a performance she had come to review. And her review was a single word: debt. The balance of power didn't shift with a clang of metal or a blast of energy. It shifted with a whisper. It shifted with the unblinking gaze of a mother who had converted her grief into a weapon of precise, inevitable reckoning. The throne was still gold. The guards still held their weapons. But the center of gravity had moved. It now resided with the woman and her two earthbound beasts. The accounting had begun, and the king was no longer the one holding the books. She didn't threaten them. She told them a story. Her voice remained level, conversational. A farmer caught a wolf in his sheep pen, she began. The alien court shifted. This wasn't the confrontation they expected. They had prepared for demands, for ultimatums. She gave them folklore. The farmer didn't kill the wolf immediately. He watched it, studied its patterns, learned its tells. The wolf thought it was hunting sheep. The farmer was hunting the wolf. The story unfolded like a tactical manual. Each detail revealed a layer of human strategy. Patience as weapon, observation as advantage, timing as decisive force. She explained how humans operate, not through blunt aggression, through calculated waiting. They observe. They learn. They identify the exact moment when intervention yields maximum effect. The wolf represents immediate threat. The farmer represents enduring strategy. The one who smiles longest walks away with everything. The aliens understood. They were the wolf. They had been smiling too early. Her teaching moment became psychological warfare. The story wasn't entertainment. It was diagnosis. She was showing them their own strategic blindness. They had assumed human weakness meant human stupidity. They learned otherwise. Weakness can be tactical. Retreat can be positioning. Silence can be preparation. The envoys felt the story's bite. The Cygnian ambassador who had smiled during the broadcast now looked ill. The Vulpex delegate adjusted his ceremonial collar. They were realizing something fundamental. They had underestimated not just human resilience, but human cunning. They had read patience as passivity. They had interpreted endurance as defeat. This cultural lens unsettled them more than weapons. A blaster they understood, a warship they could calculate, a story about a farmer and a wolf. That belonged to a type of warfare they hadn't accounted for. It suggested depths of strategic tradition they hadn't bothered to study. They dismissed human culture as primitive. They were learning that primitive stories contain sophisticated lessons. The throne room felt different now. The gold seemed less impressive. The guards seemed less formidable. The story reframed everything. The aliens had thought they were the hunters. The story suggested they might be the prey. They had been so focused on the spectacle of power that they missed the patience operating in the shadows. The resolution landed quietly. The game was revealed. The aliens were the sheep. They had been grazing contentedly while the farmer watched from the porch. They thought the fence protected them. They didn't realize the fence was what made them predictable, containable, manageable. She finished the story. The farmer didn't kill the wolf that night. He waited for dawn. He wanted to see the animal's eyes when it realized the situation had reversed. That moment of understanding is often more devastating than death. The aliens were having that moment now, the understanding that they had misread the entire board, that their apparent victory was actually vulnerability. The honey badger chuffed softly. The sound echoed in the silent room. The dog's ears twitched. They understood the story too. They were part of its lesson: endurance, loyalty, the willingness to wait for the right moment. The aliens looked at the beast differently now. They weren't just animals. They were manifestations of the story's principles: patient, observant, lethal when necessary. The king remained silent on his throne. His fingers tightened on the armrests. He understood the story wasn't for his court. It was for him. The farmer wasn't just a character. It was a promise. The wolf always gets caught, always. The question isn't if. The question is when. And who will be smiling when it happens. Weakness isn't measured in how loudly we cry. Baba Yaga looked at the assembled aliens, her face calm. She spoke to them like a teacher correcting a fundamental error. "You think strength is about never falling," she said. "True weakness is staying down after you've been buried." The words hung in the air. The diplomats shifted. They had expected rage. They received philosophy. Her weapon wasn't steel. It wasn't technology. It was memory sharpened by love. She held up her right hand, fingers slightly curved. "It was 2 small hands," she said. Her voice didn't break. It gained precision. "They used to clutch mine as we crossed streets." The image landed in the silence. A mundane human moment, a mother's hand holding 2 smaller ones. The detail was so specific it became universal. This personal revelation transformed everything. Private grief became public threat. The aliens had killed statistics. She presented them with fingerprints on her palm, the warmth of small fingers that used to trust her completely. The king's face tightened. He understood the shift. He hadn't eliminated problems. He had created a monument. Her children were no longer collateral damage. They were a reason. Maternal motivation changes combat calculus. A soldier fights for pay or ideology. A mother fights for something that can't be replaced. Her risk assessment becomes absolute. Her endurance becomes limitless. Her willingness to accept collateral damage approaches zero when protecting what remains. The aliens faced not a warrior but a force of nature. Grief had been distilled into something purer than anger. The pivot happened without fanfare. Her personal loss became planetary covenant. She wasn't just avenging her children. She was avenging the idea of children. The right to cross streets holding hands. The right to grow up. The aliens had attacked more than people. They had attacked potential. They had burned futures. She made them see the ash. Her grief became operational. More effective than any fleet. Fleets can be counted. Ships can be destroyed. How do you defeat memory? How do you shoot a story about small hands? The aliens looked at their weapons differently. Energy staff seemed clumsy next to her precise recall. Battle cruisers felt inadequate against her specific love. The resolution settled over the room. The human mother became civilization's will to survive. She wasn't just one woman. She was every parent who ever lost a child to violence. Every person who refused to let death be the last word. Her quiet presence in that opulent throne room shouted louder than any bomb. It said, "We remember." It said, "We outlast." The dog at her feet whined softly. The honey badger stared at the king without blinking. They weren't pets. They were witnesses. Extensions of her resolve. The aliens understood finally. They hadn't just killed 2 children. They had activated something ancient, something that predated their empire, something that would outlive their monuments. She didn't need to raise her voice. The truth of her statement did the work. Weakness wasn't crying. Weakness was giving up. Strength was getting up with 2 small hands forever etched in your memory. Strength was crossing streets alone but still feeling the ghost grip of tiny fingers. Strength was making sure no other mother would ever feel that particular emptiness. The king's throne seemed smaller now. His molten gold looked like cheap imitation. His power was temporary. Her power was eternal. The power of memory. The power of love that refuses to die. The power of a mother who knows exactly what was taken and exactly what it will cost to balance the scales. The aliens had weapons. She had why, and why always wins eventually. Then she named it, the Covenant of Grief. The words settled in the throne room like dust after an explosion. She spoke them quietly, but they carried. They reached every corner. Every diplomat heard them. Every guard. The king on his molten throne heard them most clearly of all. She explained it without flourish. The boogeyman doesn't walk on shadows. It walks on memory. It feeds on resolve. It takes form when silence becomes unbearable. When the living refuse to let the dead be forgotten. Her voice was flat. A statement of fact. Not a threat. A weather report for a coming storm. The concept redefined their understanding of threat. A blade can be blocked. A ship can be shot down. How do you fight a story? How do you defeat a promise made to the dead? The aliens shifted. Their confidence, already cracked, began to crumble. They had weapons for war. They had no defense against legacy. Her words made memory operational. A weapon more precise than any laser. More enduring than any empire. She spoke of small details. A child's laughter. A favorite toy. A half-finished drawing. These weren't sentimental tokens. They were targeting data. They were the coordinates grief would use to guide retaliation. The crowd's fear changed quality. It deepened, became more personal. Myth and reality blurred at the edges. Baba Yaga was no longer just a woman. She was the idea of Baba Yaga. The stories mothers told to explain why the galaxy could be cruel. The aliens realized they hadn't just killed children. They had given a myth its proof. Cultural myths gain power when someone embodies them. A story about vengeance becomes real when a person decides to live it. The Covenant bound all humanity to her cause. It wasn't just her grief anymore. It was the grief of every human who had lost someone to the Empire. A collective determination, a shared resolve. She made the terms clear. The Covenant had one clause: remember. Remember what was taken. Remember who took it. Remember that the debt remains until it is paid. The aliens understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a declaration of terms. They had chosen their action. She was choosing the reaction. Tonight, she said, the boogeyman walks with me. The statement landed without echo. The throne room absorbed it. The air felt heavier. The light seemed dimmer. The dog at her feet lifted its head. The honey badger showed its teeth. They weren't just animals. They were part of the Covenant, avatars of the promise. The personal vendetta transformed. It was no longer about one mother's loss. It was about a civilization's response to extinction, an interstellar reckoning. The king finally spoke. His voice sounded thin. He asked what she wanted. She didn't answer him directly. She looked at the diplomats. She looked at the guards. She said the Covenant doesn't negotiate. It collects. The resolution settled over them. The personal had become planetary. The grief of one had become the resolve of many. The boogeyman was no longer a story. It was a strategic reality. A new factor in galactic politics. The aliens had wanted to erase humanity. Instead, they had given it a unifying purpose. A reason to endure, a reason to fight. She turned from the throne. The audience was over. The terms were set. The Covenant was in effect. The dog fell into step beside her. The honey badger took up the rear. They walked from the room the way they entered. Without haste, without looking back, they left behind a silent court and a king who finally understood. He hadn't won a war. He had started a different kind of war. One fought not with ships but with memory. One he had no idea how to win. Then the guards moved. 12 of them. Ceremonial armor gleaming, energy staffs humming to life. They formed a perimeter around Baba Yaga, standard containment procedure. They expected her to panic, to freeze, to beg. She did none of these things. Her blade appeared without flourish, a simple combat knife. Carbon steel, well used. She held it low. Her stance relaxed. The first guard lunged. She didn't block. She turned her shoulder. The staff passed harmlessly. Her knife found the gap between chest plate and helmet. A precise insertion. The guard collapsed without sound. The dog moved simultaneously. It didn't bark. It targeted the second guard's legs. A sharp lunge. Teeth found the weak point behind the knee. The guard screamed. The sound cut short as the honey badger hit his throat. The animal moved with shocking speed. A blur of fur and fury. It didn't maul. It targeted. Carotid artery. Spinal cord. Efficient kills. Baba Yaga's movements were economical. No wasted motion. Each step placed with purpose. Each strike delivered with precision. She slipped between guards like smoke. Her blade found joints, seams, weak points in alien armor they thought impregnable. She whispered sleep each time a guard fell. The word was almost gentle, a ritual acknowledgement. The remaining guards hesitated. Their training hadn't covered this. They were bred for frontal assault, for overwhelming force. They faced something different, surgical precision. The dog and honey badger worked in concert with her. A triangle of death. They covered angles she couldn't. They created openings she used. Specialized training beats numbers every time. Quality over quantity. One well-placed cut does more damage than 100 wild swings. The guards had strength. She had knowledge. They had armor. She knew where the armor ended. They had weapons. She had purpose. The difference showed. The diplomats watched in silent horror. This wasn't combat. It was dissection. They saw guards fall without understanding how. One moment standing, next moment collapsing. No dramatic clashes. No energy blasts. Just quiet efficiency. A woman and 2 animals dismantling elite guards like they were practice dummies. Each move was choreographed. A nightmarish ballet. She pivoted. The dog fainted. The honey badger struck. Guards fell in sequence, like dominoes. The pattern was clear to anyone watching. They weren't fighting to win. They were demonstrating, showing the aliens what human resolve looked like when sharpened to a point. The last guard backed away. His staff trembled. She didn't pursue him. She simply looked at him. The dog sat. The honey badger licked blood from its claws. The guard dropped his weapon. The clatter echoed in the silent room. 12 elite guards. Less than a minute. All neutralized. Most dead, some wounded. None standing. Human resolve proved remorseless. Grief had been forged into something lethal. Not blind rage, focused intent. Every movement served the covenant. Every strike honored the debt. The throne room stank of blood and ozone. The diplomat stood frozen. The king watched from his throne. His face pale. His hands gripping the armrests. The demonstration was over. The message delivered. She watched the last guard fall. Her blade clean. Her breathing even. The throne room smelled of ozone and copper. She looked at the king. Not with anger. With understanding. Funny thing about legions, she said. Her voice carried in the silence. They're made of individuals. The statement landed like a verdict. Empires think in terms of masses, populations, statistical abstracts. Humans understand a simpler truth. Individuals bleed. Her strategy reflected this. She didn't target the imperial system. She targeted the people who comprised it. The guards, the diplomats, the king, each person who made the machine function. The dog licked blood from its paw. The honey badger watched the remaining courtiers. They weren't just animals. They were emblems. The dog represented human loyalty. The badger embodied human ferocity. Together, they demonstrated what the empire had dismissed as primitive. They turned the throne room into theater, not of conquest, of inevitability. Research supports this approach. Decentralized resistance often defeats centralized power. Guerrilla warfare. Asymmetric conflict. The stronghold's weakness isn't its walls, it's the people inside. Their fears. Their loyalties. Their willingness to keep fighting. She understood this. The empire didn't. The king's bravado collapsed. He watched his elite guard dismantled. 12 highly trained soldiers, neutralized by 1 woman and 2 earth creatures. His confidence, which seemed unshakable moments before, evaporated. His hands trembled on the throne's armrests. The molten gold seemed to mock him. All that power, all that grandeur, useless against focused intent. The moment crystallized a fundamental truth. Apparent superiority means nothing against unyielding presence. Technology fails. Numbers fail. Resolve endures. She stood amidst the fallen guards without triumph. Without gloating. She simply stood. Her calm more terrifying than any victory dance. The myth of imperial invincibility shattered. It didn't crack. It didn't fade. It shattered. Like glass hitting stone. The diplomats saw it. The courtiers saw it. The king felt it most deeply. His entire concept of power disintegrated. He ruled through fear and spectacle. She operated through precision and purpose. Different currencies. His was losing value fast. She didn't need to speak the lesson. Her presence taught it. The dog's steady breathing taught it. The honey badger's unblinking stare taught it. Systems crack when individuals break. The empire's strength was its weakness. Its reliance on centralized control made it vulnerable. One crack in the foundation and the whole structure trembles. The resolution settled over the room. Power had shifted. Not through force of arms. Through force of will. The king remained on his throne but no longer ruled the space. She did. Her quiet certainty filled the room. Her understanding of individual weakness became the new operating principle. The aliens finally grasped their error. They had focused on human technology, human numbers, human resources. They missed the human factor, the stubbornness, the creativity, the willingness to adapt. They fought a war of attrition against an enemy that fought a war of nerves. Different battlefields, different rules. The king looked at his remaining guards. They hesitated. Their eyes showed doubt. Their stances showed fear. They were individuals again, not parts of a machine. They bled, they felt pain. They wanted to live. The empire's greatest strength, its collective power, became its greatest weakness when faced with someone who understood how to make it individual again. She didn't smile. She didn't threaten. She simply watched the king. Her gaze said everything. Your legions are made of people. Your power relies on their belief. Your invincibility requires their faith. I have taken both. Now we see what remains. She approached the throne again. The bodies of guards lay around her. She ignored them. Her attention belonged to the king. Her blade made a small cut on her palm. A single drop of blood welled up. She held it to the light, a perfect sphere of crimson. The throne room watched. The diplomats held their breath. She extended her hand toward the king. The drop trembled but held its form. One is all it takes, Majesty, she whispered. The words carried. They reached every corner of the silent chamber. The king stared at the blood, his face pale, his hands gripping the molten gold. The drop held multiple meanings. It was her blood, human blood, the blood of the species he had tried to erase. It represented her personal loss, the children whose blood had been spilled. It also signaled humanity's collective resolve. A covenant made visible, a promise given form. Collapse doesn't always come with explosions. Sometimes it comes with a whisper, sometimes with a single drop of blood. Civilizations fall not from lack of weapons but from lack of memory. The king had forgotten that truth. He thought power came from fear and spectacle. She reminded him it comes from endurance and recall. History shows symbolic acts often trigger major shifts. A thrown stone, a refused seat on a bus, a hand raised with blood. These gestures transcend their physical form. They become catalysts. They give form to ideas that were previously abstract. They make resistance tangible. The boogeyman rhetoric intensified around her. She wasn't just a woman anymore. She was the idea of the boogeyman given flesh, the thing that walks on memory instead of shadow, the thing that emerges when silence becomes unbearable. Her presence promised that others would follow, that this was just the beginning. The holy screens around the throne room began to glow, a soft amber light at first, then brighter. Images flickered across their surfaces. Not the king's propaganda, not imperial announcements. Something else. Something the aliens hadn't expected. The envoys turned to look. Their faces showed confusion. Then dawning horror. The private vendetta revealed its true scale. This wasn't just about one mother's loss. It was about an entire civilization's response. The screens showed human ships where they shouldn't be. Human flags flying over alien outposts. The patient, careful preparation of years now becoming visible. The long game finally revealed. The king understood too late. His extermination broadcast hadn't ended a threat. It had activated one. He had given humanity a unifying purpose, a reason to set aside differences, a reason to fight with everything they had. His attempt to erase them had made them stronger, more determined, more focused. The drop of blood still hung from her finger. A perfect sphere, unshaken, the symbol of an oath that would not be broken, a covenant that would not be forgotten. The king looked from the blood to the screens. His empire was unraveling. His power was crumbling, all because he had underestimated the power of a mother's grief. The resolution settled over the room. The personal had become planetary. The single drop had become an ocean. The vendetta had become a war. And the boogeyman was no longer just a story. It was a strategic reality, one the Empire was completely unprepared to face. Then the holy screens lit up. Across the throne room, displays meant for imperial proclamations flickered to life. They didn't show the king's sigil. They showed tactical readouts, strategic positions, fleet movements. Human warships appeared where none should exist. Along trade routes, near resource depots, orbiting core worlds. The scale was staggering. This wasn't a raiding force. This was an armada. The screens revealed the truth behind human patience. Years of strategic deception. Decades of hidden preparation. The aliens had laughed at human weakness while humans built strength in shadow. They dismissed human technology as primitive while humans reverse-engineered alien drives. They mocked human unity while humans forged alliances in silence. The screen showed the results. Colonies flying human banners, garrisons surrounded, supply lines cut. The Empire's periphery was already falling. Human warships bore down on key positions. Their designs were unfamiliar. Hybrid technology, alien hulls with human modifications. They moved with purpose, not random aggression. Surgical strikes. They targeted communication hubs first, then logistics centers, then command posts. The pattern was clear. This was coordinated, planned. executed with precision the Empire couldn't match. Baba Yaga watched the screens without expression. She spoke to the stunned court. "We let you laugh at us," her voice was flat. "We buried our grief where you couldn't see." The statement explained everything. The apparent weakness, the seeming submission, it had all been calculation. The humans hadn't been defeated. They'd been preparing. The reaction among envoys varied. Some showed terror, their faces pale, hands trembling. They understood the implications. Their worlds were now vulnerable, their privileges threatened. Others showed acceptance, a quiet resignation. They'd suspected the Empire's arrogance would bring consequences. Now they saw them materialize. A few looked almost relieved. The unchallenged dominance had felt unnatural. Now balance returned. Strategic patience often defeats immediate aggression. The aliens sought quick victories, spectacular shows of force. The humans played the longer game. They endured humiliation. They absorbed losses. They waited for the perfect moment. The King's extermination broadcast provided that moment. It unified humanity. It gave them righteous cause. It made the Empire overconfident. The galaxy realized this was no private vendetta. The scale was too large, the coordination too perfect. This was civilization scale shift. The screens showed human flags over former Imperial holdings, human vessels controlling choke points, human commanders issuing orders to surrendered alien crews. The balance of power wasn't shifting. It had shifted. Humanity recontextualized from weak to imminent. The laughingstock became the dominant force. Borders weren't just changing. They were being redrawn according to human design. The Empire's territorial claims meant nothing against actual warships in actual orbit. The maps were being remade in real time. The dawn of the new order became visible to all. The screens showed the future. Human and alien vessels sharing space, former Imperial worlds negotiating new treaties. The King's power was already memory. His commands would no longer reach beyond this room. His authority was confined to molten gold and fading tradition. The Armada's appearance demonstrated tactical brilliance. Hiding that many ships, that much firepower, that level of coordination. It required planning on a scale the Empire never imagined. The humans hadn't just built weapons. They'd built an entire parallel military structure in secret. They'd done it under the Empire's nose while being called weak. The element of surprise was total. The Empire's intelligence networks had failed completely. Their scouts had missed the buildup. Their analysts had dismissed the signs. Their leaders had been too arrogant to consider the possibility. Now they saw the results of that arrogance. Their security was illusion. Their dominance was fiction. The resolution was inevitable. The screen showed human victory after human victory, not through brute force, through superior strategy, better timing, perfect execution. The Empire's forces were being neutralized with minimal casualties. The humans weren't conquering. They were liberating. They were rearranging. The King's crown hit the floor, a dull metallic sound. It rolled a few inches, stopped against a dead guard's boot. The noise was small in the large room. It meant everything. Authority isn't a throne. It's belief. The crown on the ground meant belief had ended. He faced his defeat without ceremony. No grand speech, no final defiance. His shoulders slumped. The molten gold throne seemed to mock him. All that power, all that grandeur, reduced to this moment. He looked at Baba Yaga, not with hatred, with understanding. He finally saw the reality he had created. His surrender wasn't negotiated. It was explicit, complete. "I surrender," he said. 2 words. They cost him everything. They gave him nothing. The words acknowledged the shift. Power wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the woman with the teacup and the 2 beasts. The room absorbed the statement. The diplomats stood frozen. The guards lay still. The Empire's banners came down. Robed attendants moved without being told. They pulled the silken standards from the walls. The symbols of galactic dominance folded into neat piles. Attention shifted to the human victors. Not with fear, with acceptance. A new reality settling in. The old order was over. The new one was beginning. This wasn't just the end of a throne. It was the start of a new equilibrium. Power balances reset. Alliances reformed. The galaxy would never be the same. The King's era ended not with a war but with a surrender. A quiet admission in a room full of witnesses. The change was permanent. Symbolic surrenders mark historical turning points. They crystallize shifts that everyone feels but nobody has acknowledged. The king's words made the change official. They gave form to the new reality. From this moment forward, the galaxy would operate under different rules. Human rules. The rules of the Covenant. The boogeyman's face became visible. And it was human. Not a monster from shadows. A mother with a blade and a promise. The aliens saw her clearly now. Not as a terrorist, not as a revolutionary, as a force of nature. A consequence they had brought upon themselves. The stories about her would change. She was no longer myth. She was fact. Baba Yaga's final line carried both mercy and finality. She looked at the king, not with triumph, with closure. "Thank you," she said. Her voice held no mockery. "That will be your final performance." The words ended his reign. They sealed his fate. He would never command again. He would never be feared again. He was now part of the past. The king's era ended with a performance he didn't expect to give. He thought his broadcast was his masterpiece. His statement of power, it turned out to be his downfall. His cruelty created his enemy. His arrogance blinded him to the response. His surrender was the last act in a play he thought he was directing. The honey badger jumped onto the throne. It didn't sit. It stood, watching. The dog remained at Baba Yaga's side, guarding. The symbols were clear. The old power was gone. The new power was present. It was feral. It was loyal. It was unforgiving. The resolution was absolute. The king's surrender wasn't the beginning of negotiations. It was the end of everything he represented. The empire would continue, but it would be different. It would remember this day. It would remember the cost of arrogance. It would remember the power of grief. The diplomats began to leave. They walked quietly. No speeches. No protests. They accepted the new reality. They would carry the news to their worlds. The Galactic King had surrendered. The humans had won. The galaxy had changed. The story was over. The consequences were just beginning. Baba Yaga looked at the fallen king. The dog sat at her feet. The honey badger stood on the throne. She spoke 2 sentences. "Thank you. That will be your final performance." The words closed his reign. They ended his authority. They signaled a new beginning. Her statement wasn't theatrical. It was factual. A closing note delivered with precision. The Empire's power dissolved into memory. The banners lay in piles. The guards lay still. The diplomats watched silently. 2 feral allies stood watch. The dog's ears twitched. The honey badger's eyes scanned the room. They were the new sentinels. She spoke to the entire galaxy through the watching envoys. Her voice carried beyond the throne room. "We are not the monsters you feared." A pause. The air held still. "We are worse." The statement redefined everything. Monsters are predictable. They operate on instinct. Humans operate on purpose, on memory, on calculated response. Post-conflict statements often define new realities. They set the terms of what comes next. Her words weren't victory gloating. They were policy announcement. Humanity's identity transformed in that moment. No longer the oppressed. No longer the victims. They became predators with purpose. Their actions would now carry intent. Their power would serve memory. Restraint became their strategic weapon, more dangerous than any blade. They had waited years for this moment. They could wait longer to enforce their will. The galaxy would learn that human patience was their sharpest tool. The ability to not strike immediately, to choose the perfect moment, to make every action count. The smiling predator emerged as the new cosmic reality, not a mindless devourer, a calculating force, one that remembers every insult, every loss, every moment of injustice. The king had wanted spectacle. He received consequence. He had wanted fear. He received resolve. The difference was fundamental. Her words hung in the air. The envoys understood. This wasn't just about regime change. This was about philosophical shift. Power would no longer be about display. It would be about endurance, about who could outlast whom, about who remembered longest. The humans had just demonstrated their superiority in both. The honey badger tore a strip from the king's banner. The sound of ripping silk echoed. The dog growled softly. The symbols of the old order were being dismantled. Not with ceremony, with animal practicality. The beasts understood the new reality better than the aliens. Power belongs to those who hold the ground, who show no hesitation. Baba Yaga didn't smile. She didn't frown. Her face showed completion. A task finished, a debt collected, the covenant fulfilled, but also a new responsibility assumed. Humanity wasn't just avenged. It was in charge. The weight of that responsibility showed in her eyes. The grief remained. Now it had company, duty. The final performance was over. The curtain had fallen. The audience was dismissed. But the show would continue under new management. With new rules. With new understanding of what power means, what strength requires, what memory demands. The galaxy had watched a king fall. It would now learn how humans rise. The resolution was absolute. The old order was finished. The new order was present. It stood in a woman with a teacup. It sat in a scarred dog. It prowled in a honey badger. It lived in every human who remembered, who endured, who waited for their moment. The performance was over. The work was just beginning. They forgot that memory outlasts empires. The Galactic King focused on present spectacle. His molten throne, his broadcast executions, his immediate shows of force. He thought power lived in the moment. In the visible, in the now. Humans understood something deeper. Power lives in what endures, in what remembers, in what waits. The narrative reveals this contrast. While the king staged theater, humans cultivated long memory. They documented every injustice, every loss, every name. They preserved stories. They passed down grievances. They turned personal pain into collective resolve. The king's spectacle was flashy but fleeting. Human memory was quiet but permanent. Baba Yaga demonstrated the transformation. Grief, when remembered collectively, becomes power. Her personal loss became humanity's cause. The twins weren't just her children. They became symbols, martyrs, reasons to continue fighting. The covenant of grief ensured no atrocity would be forgotten. It bound humanity together through shared memory. Through common purpose, research supports this approach. Civilizations that preserve memory outlast those that don't. Societies that remember their history endure longer than those that live only in the present. The king's empire focused on immediate dominance. It neglected its own history. It forgot why power requires legitimacy. Humans did the opposite. They built their strategy on remembrance. The covenant functioned as operational doctrine. It ensured every human understood the debt. Every citizen knew the story. The twins' execution wasn't just an event. It became a lesson, a rallying point, a reason to endure hardship. The memory fueled their patience. It justified their sacrifices. It gave meaning to their waiting. Strategic patience proved more effective than immediate retaliation. The king expected anger. He prepared for rage. He got calculation instead. Humans didn't strike back immediately. They waited. They prepared. They chose the perfect moment. Their patience became their advantage. Their memory became their guide. The galaxy learned a hard lesson. Humanity's strength lies in enduring memory, not in technology, not in numbers, in the ability to remember, to learn, to adapt. The aliens had superior ships, better weapons, more territory, but they lacked historical consciousness. They lived in the present. Humans lived across time. Forgetting would have been their true defeat. If humans had moved on, if they had accepted the king's dominance, if they had let the twins become statistics, that would have been true loss, true weakness. Remembering became their strength, their weapon, their path to victory. The smiling predator doesn't threaten. It promises. It doesn't rage. It calculates. It doesn't forget. It remembers. This combination redefined danger for the galactic community. Danger was no longer about who had the biggest ships. It was about who had the longest memory, the deepest patience, the sharpest strategy. The resolution settled across star systems. Humanity wasn't just another empire. They were the makers of rules, the enforcers of consequences. Their power came from willingness to wait, to endure, to remember. This made them more formidable than any mere monster. Monsters can be killed. Concepts are harder to eliminate. The king learned this too late. His molten throne cooled. His banners were torn down. His legacy became cautionary tale. The aliens learned to respect human stories, to study human games, to understand that patience often looks like weakness until it strikes. The galaxy adjusted to the new reality. Human diplomats spoke softly. Human ships patrolled borders. Human memory watched everything. The smiling predators had arrived. They weren't going away. They were just beginning their work. The work of ensuring no other children would be killed for spectacle. No other species would be erased for entertainment. This new order brought stability through certainty. The rules were clear. The consequences were known. The aliens could predict human response with perfect accuracy. This predictability became the foundation of peace. A peace built not on friendship but on understanding, on the certain knowledge that certain actions would bring certain responses. Humanity's identity was fixed. They were the guardians of memory, the enforcers of the covenant, the smiling predators who watched and waited and remembered. The galaxy had feared monsters. They got something infinitely more dangerous. They got justice with patience. They got vengeance with calculation. They got predators who smiled while they worked. The debt was paid. The covenant stood complete. Across star systems, human flags flew where imperial banners had fallen. The galaxy learned its lesson the hard way. True strength often wears the face of patience. Human endurance outlasts alien spectacle. Strategic waiting defeats immediate aggression. They thought grief made us weak. They learned it made us determined. A mother's loss became an empire's downfall. Remember that day. Remember the cost of underestimating resolve. The smiling predators watch now. They remember everything. They never forget. They never forgive. The debt is always paid. The resolution established new foundations. Memory became the bedrock of the new galactic order. The covenant of grief evolved into a principle of governance. New laws required remembrance. Historical awareness became valued. The past wasn't something to escape. It was something to learn from. To build upon, this shift changed everything. Power was no longer about spectacle. It was about legacy, about what endures. The king's molten throne was melted down. His banners were burned, but the memory of the twins remained. Their names were carved into the new council chamber. Their story was taught to every child. The honey badger and dog became symbols too. Not of violence, of loyalty, of memory. They represented the enduring bonds that outlast empires, the simple truths that survive grand spectacles. Their presence in the throne room that day reminded everyone. Some things cannot be killed, cannot be erased, cannot be forgotten. Memory became the ultimate weapon because it cannot be disarmed. It cannot be destroyed. It lives in stories, in traditions, in the quiet determination of people who refuse to forget. The king learned this too late. His power was temporary. Human memory was permanent. That difference decided everything. The new order was built on this understanding. Laws were written to preserve history. Education emphasized learning from the past. Leadership required historical knowledge. The galaxy became a place where memory was valued, where the past informed the present, where spectacle was replaced by substance. Baba Yaga's teacup was placed in a museum, not as a trophy, as a reminder. A simple object that witnessed great change. A symbol that memory often lives in small things, in quiet moments, in determined people. The cup outlasted the throne. The memory outlasted the empire. They called it weakness. They mistook patience for passivity. The aliens saw immediate aggression as strength. They viewed delayed response as cowardice. This miscalculation became their fatal flaw. Humans understood something different. They called it timing. Strategic advantage lives in the pause between action and reaction. The aliens sought instant dominance, flashy shows of force, spectacular victories. Humans played the longer game. They measured success in years, not moments. They valued position over spectacle. This difference defined the conflict from the beginning. Baba Yaga's farmer and wolf story illustrated the principle perfectly. The farmer doesn't rush. He observes. He learns the wolf's patterns. He waits for the perfect moment to act. The wolf represents immediate threat. The farmer represents enduring strategy. The one who waits longest wins the most. The story wasn't folklore. It was tactical doctrine. Research supports this approach. Delayed gratification often produces greater outcomes. The ability to postpone satisfaction correlates with strategic success. Humans applied this psychologically. They endured humiliation. They absorbed losses. They let the aliens believe in their weakness. This became their operational advantage. The galaxy's laughter became their blind spot. They mocked human sentimentality. They jeered at human grief. They interpreted emotional display as tactical flaw. They failed to understand that grief, when channeled properly, becomes resolve. That sentimentality, when focused, becomes purpose. Their dismissal of these traits created vulnerability. Humanity's willingness to endure became their edge. They let the empire expand. They allowed territorial losses. They accepted diplomatic insults. They stored every slight, every injustice, every moment of humiliation. These became fuel, motivation, strategic data points. The King's broadcast was just the final entry in a long list. This psychological approach proved more effective than brute force. The aliens had bigger ships, better weapons, more territory, but they lacked strategic depth. They couldn't understand an enemy that didn't fight on their terms, that didn't value what they valued, that played by different rules. The King's immediate triumph became his ultimate defeat. His extermination broadcast seemed like victory. It was actually catastrophe. It unified humanity. It provided righteous cause. It gave them the moral high ground. His short-term spectacle created long-term consequences he never anticipated. Patience revealed itself as the ultimate power move. Not through dramatic announcement. Through gradual demonstration. The human armada didn't appear overnight. It emerged from decades of quiet preparation, years of hidden development, moments of calculated restraint. The psychological dimension often decides conflicts. Technology matters. Numbers matter. But understanding how your opponent thinks matters more. The aliens thought in linear terms. Immediate cause and effect. Humans thought in cycles. Action and reaction across time. The resolution wasn't sudden. It was inevitable. The King's surrender wasn't a moment. It was the culmination of a process. A process built on human patience, on willingness to wait, on understanding that some victories require letting your enemy believe they've already won. This approach demands discipline. It requires rejecting immediate gratification. It means enduring temporary setbacks for long-term gains. The aliens never developed this capacity. Their culture valued now over later, presence over legacy. This limitation became their undoing. The honey badger exemplified this principle. It didn't attack immediately. It watched. It assessed. It chose its moment. Its ferocity was matched by its patience. The dog showed similar restraint. It waited for signals. It responded to cues. It understood timing. Humanity's victory wasn't about destruction. It was about outlasting, about enduring, about remembering when others forgot. The psychological warfare preceded the physical conflict. The battle was won before the first shot was fired. It was won in the waiting, in the planning, in the quiet determination to play the long game. The galaxy learned this lesson through defeat. They learned that weakness and patience can look similar from the outside, that immediate power often masks long-term vulnerability, that the smiling predator who waits is more dangerous than the roaring one who attacks. They dismissed Earth creatures as primitive. The alien guards saw animals, not weapons, not threats. They underestimated terrestrial biology. They misunderstood loyalty bonds. Their training covered energy weapons, ship combat, diplomatic protocol. It didn't cover a scarred dog and a honey badger. The dog moved with trained precision. Every step calculated, every muscle controlled. It represented unwavering loyalty, bond forged through shared hardship. It wasn't a pet. It was a partner. Its scars told stories the aliens couldn't read. Its torn ear signaled experience they couldn't measure. When it moved with purpose. The honey badger embodied relentless ferocity, low to the ground, muscles coiled, black eyes watching everything. It didn't posture. It didn't threaten. It simply existed as potential violence. Its claws scraped the stone floor. The sound set teeth on edge. Its unpredictability became its greatest asset. The aliens couldn't anticipate its movements. Their tactical algorithms had no data for this. Research confirms the advantage. Human-animal partnerships create combat synergy. Dogs offer heightened senses. Superior hearing, acute smell. They detect threats before technology can. They navigate environments that confuse machines. Honey badgers possess biological advantages. Thick skin resists bites and stings. Powerful claws tear through armor. Their aggression quotient exceeds most predators. These beasts became extensions of Baba Yaga's will. They didn't need commands. They understood subtle signals. A glance, a shift in stance, a quiet breath. They moved as part of her strategy. The dog targeted weak points. The honey badger created chaos. Together they formed a combat system more effective than any weapon. Their Earth origin made them unpredictable. Alien defenses were designed for energy weapons, for plasma bursts, for sonic attacks. They had no protocols for animal combat. The guards hesitated. Their instinct said animal. Their training said threat. The conflict between these signals created fatal delays. The psychological impact amplified their effectiveness. Facing unknown creatures triggers primal fear. The honey badger's growl operated on subconscious levels. The dog's silent intensity created unease. The aliens were used to predictable opponents. These animals defied categorization. They weren't following rules the guards understood. The dog demonstrated its capabilities early. It broke a weapon shaft with its jaws. The sound of snapping composite material echoed. The guard stared at his broken staff. His face showed disbelief. Decades of training rendered useless against terrestrial biology. The honey badger tore through armor. Claws found gaps humans couldn't see. Protective plates meant nothing against evolutionary adaptation. Their effectiveness wasn't accidental. It was strategic choice. Baba Yaga selected companions that maximized psychological impact. The dog represented loyalty and precision. The honey badger represented ferocity and unpredictability. Together they covered the spectrum of threat. They forced the aliens to confront multiple combat paradigms simultaneously. The resolution became clear through demonstration. Earth's natural weapons proved superior to alien technology, not through brute force, through adaptability, through evolutionary refinement. The animals operated in environments technology failed. They functioned when systems jammed. They persisted when power failed. The honey badger's thick skin defeated energy weapons. Blasts that would drop most creatures barely phased it. The dog's agility avoided attacks that would have hit slower targets. Their biological advantages created asymmetric warfare. The aliens had superior technology. The animals had superior design. The partnership demonstrated ancient wisdom. Sometimes the best weapons aren't built. They're bred. They're trained. They're earned through mutual respect. The dog and honey badger weren't tools. They were allies. Their presence redefined the conflict from technological to biological. From predictable to adaptive, the throne room became their proving ground. Every fallen guard testified to their effectiveness. Every hesitant step from the diplomats confirmed their psychological impact. The aliens learned a hard lesson. Underestimating Earth's creatures was tactical error, one that cost them their security, their confidence, their dominance. The beasts stood watch as the king surrendered, their quiet presence more convincing than any speech. They had done their job. They had supported their partner. They had demonstrated that sometimes the oldest solutions work best, that nature often outsmarts technology, that loyalty and ferocity combined create unstoppable force. They thought culture was weakness. They dismissed human stories as primitive folklore, childish tales. The aliens measured civilization by technology scales, energy output, military reach. They missed the strategic depth in simple narratives, the farmer and the wolf, Baba Yaga's legend. These weren't just stories. They were training manuals, psychological warfare tools, cultural reservoirs of hard-won wisdom. Baba Yaga's use of mythology proved strategically brilliant. She didn't lead with weapons. She led with a story about a farmer catching a wolf. The allegory reframed the entire conflict. It taught patience, timing, the value of watching and waiting. The aliens expected brute force. They received a lesson in strategic endurance. The story unsettled them more than any show of arms. It revealed a mindset they hadn't anticipated. Research indicates cultural narratives often contain strategic wisdom. Folktales encode survival knowledge. Myths preserve tactical insights across generations. The farmer and wolf story taught that victory goes to those who understand their opponent's patterns, who strike at the perfect moment. The aliens focused on immediate dominance. They overlooked the long game. Their dismissal of human culture became their critical blind spot. The Baba Yaga myth itself became a psychological weapon. Her introduction as a figure whispered by Earth Mothers carried weight. It wasn't just a name. It was a promise. A warning. The legend spoke of vengeance, of consequences for harming the vulnerable. The aliens began to understand. They weren't facing one woman. They were facing a cultural archetype, a story made flesh, Humanity's cultural depth provided strategic resources aliens lacked. While the Empire developed better weapons, humans studied stories. They analyzed allegories. They understood that conflict isn't just about force. It's about psychology, about outthinking your opponent. The farmer story taught that the one who smiles longest wins. This cultural insight complemented military strategy perfectly. The aliens relied on technological superiority. They had superior ships, better weapons, more territory. But they lacked cultural intelligence. They didn't understand the stories their opponents told. They didn't recognize the strategic patterns embedded in folklore. This gap in understanding became their vulnerability. Their arrogance prevented them from seeing the wisdom in what they considered primitive. Baba Yaga's storytelling was deliberate psychological warfare. She used the farmer analogy to expose alien strategic blindness. The story showed how patience defeats impulsivity, how observation triumphs over brute force. The aliens had laughed at human culture. Now they faced its practical application. The story became a mirror showing them their own weaknesses. The cultural advantage extended beyond single stories. Human civilization had thousands of years of narrative tradition, countless tales of underdogs winning, of patience rewarded, of cleverness overcoming strength. This collective wisdom informed their entire strategy. The aliens had databases and tactical manuals. Humans had Aesop and folklore. The stories proved more useful in the end. Resolution came through cultural understanding. The new interstellar order would value narrative wisdom. It would recognize that stories contain strategic depth. That folklore preserves important lessons. Culture became the foundation rather than decoration. The aliens learned to respect what they had dismissed. They saw that primitive tales often contain advanced thinking. The throne room confrontation demonstrated this shift. Baba Yaga's stories did more damage than weapons could. They changed minds. They shifted perceptions. They made the aliens question their assumptions. A simple folktale about a farmer and wolf helped bring down an empire. It showed that culture isn't weakness. It's a weapon, one that outlasts technology, that endures when metal rusts and power fails. The final lesson was clear. Never underestimate the stories a culture tells itself. They contain its soul, its resilience, its strategy for survival. The aliens focused on destroying human technology. They should have been worrying about the stories, the narratives that would eventually destroy them. Culture became the bedrock of the new order because it had proven itself the strongest foundation. The galaxy feared monsters. The stories told of ravening beasts, mindless devourers, unthinking destroyers. They prepared for that. They built defenses against primal rage. They got something worse, something calculated, something patient. Humanity's transformation in galactic perception was total, from nuisance to apex predator, from weaklings to strategists. The aliens expected roaring fury. They received quiet precision. They anticipated mindless violence. They faced methodical dismantling. Baba Yaga's declaration redefined everything. She stood amid the fallen guards. The dog sat calmly. The honey badger watched. She spoke 3 sentences that changed interstellar relations forever. We are patient. We are grieving. We are smiling predators. Each word landed with precision. Each phrase recontextualized humanity's place in the cosmos. Research confirms the psychological impact. Calculated response terrifies more than blind rage. Fury is predictable. It follows patterns. It burns out. Calculation is endless. It adjusts, it adapts. It never stops. The aliens faced not a temporary outburst but permanent repositioning. Humanity's combination creates unique threat profile. Emotion fuels the engine. Grief provides the motivation. But calculation steers the vehicle. This fusion makes them unpredictable yet consistent. Their actions follow logic, but the logic is emotional. The aliens couldn't decode this combination. Their tactical models had no category for grieving strategists. The smiling predator concept introduced new warfare dimension. Not just physical conflict, psychological dominance. The smile isn't friendly. It's knowing. It's the expression of someone who understands the game better than you, who knows they will win, who enjoys the process. This psychological layer multiplied the threat. Interstellar power relationships redrew themselves in real time. The king's surrender wasn't just military defeat. It was philosophical collapse. His concept of power based on spectacle and fear evaporated. Human power based on patience and memory established itself. The shift was fundamental. Permanent. Humanity emerged as the galaxy's most dangerous force precisely because they became predictable. Predictable in their response to aggression. Predictable in their protection of the vulnerable. Predictable in their enforcement of the covenant. This predictability created stability through dread. The aliens knew exactly what would happen if they harmed humans again. That certainty was more frightening than random violence.